We have a very basic application. The next step in our journey is to add some data. Data is an integral part of any application. Data can be rendered onto the page like a username or profile picture. You can use the data to affect how the content gets rendered on the page. For example, we can restrict access to areas based on the data in our application. Adding data to a Vue application is simple. Inside the script, we can add a property to the object we passed into the view.createApp function called data. We'll set this property to a function. During the initialization phase of our app, Vue will search for a function in our configuration object called data. If it finds the data function, it'll call it. Vue expects an object to be returned by the function. Let's return an object. The object we return from this function will represent the data in our application. We can add any type of data we'd like. We can add strings, numbers, booleans, objects, and arrays. Let's create a property called firstName with a value of John. The object returned by the function will be registered with the Vue application we're creating. Vue will let us render our data into the document. That's something we'll want to do next. We want to render the nameData property onto the document. We can do that by writing a JavaScript expression. Here's a quick refresher on expressions. A JavaScript expression is a single line of code that can be evaluated to a single value. The value can be a number, string, or logical value. There are all kinds of expressions. Here are some examples: arithmetic operations, basic string manipulation, and logical comparisons are considered expressions. All three examples will evaluate to a single value. To add a bit more clarity, here are some examples that aren't considered expressions. Variable and function declarations are not expressions. The same goes for conditional statements. Vue enables us to use expressions in the document. Let me show you how. Switching to the HTML document, between the div tags, add 2 pairs of curly brackets. Vue will treat the content inside the div tag as a template. This will only apply to elements that are selected by Vue. In our script, we selected the element by chaining the mount function. Expressions can be used inside templates. An expression can be added to the template by writing a pair of 2 curly brackets. Inside the curly brackets, we can write an expression. For example, we'll add 2 numbers together. Whatever this evaluates to is what will get rendered onto the document. Vue will take care of finding the expression, grabbing the results, and then insert it into the document. Let's give this a test. We'll refresh the page on the browser. The expression will get evaluated. The result of the evaluation is what gets outputted instead of the curly brackets. That's thanks to Vue. However, we don't want to perform a basic math operation. We want to output the name we have in the data object. Let's head back to the editor. Back in the HTML document, we're going to replace the expression with the name of the data we added, firstName. That's all we need to do. Let's test it out. Refresh the page. The name John will appear on the page. With very little work, we've created some data and displayed it on the page. There is quite a bit going on here, so let's go over it one by one. The expression is the name of the data property we defined in the Vue instance. All data properties are exposed directly by their names. We don't have to use the this keyword. Vue will be able to make the connection on its own. After evaluating the expression, Vue will replace the curly brackets with the value. You can think of the curly brackets as a placeholder. You may also hear this as being described as string interpolation. These 2 phrases can be interchangeable at times, but there is a difference between them. Expressions are the code inside the curly brackets, whereas string interpolation is describing the process of replacing a placeholder with a string value. Therefore, you can say, the expression firstName is interpolated into John. A bit of terminology going on here. You'll hear people throw around both terms when discussing Vue templates. It's important to know what they mean when they use these terms. There is a limitation as to what you can insert in the curly brackets. Anything other than an expression is not allowed. You can't perform declarations or conditional logic. What do I mean by this? You can't define a variable and expect it to work. For example purposes, I'll replace the current expression with a variable declaration. This expression will not work, but let's see what the result of this declaration will be in the browser. Nothing appears. If we were to look inside the console, then we'll find an error. It tells us that we must avoid using JavaScript keywords, so that's one limitation. Another thing you need to be aware of is that expressions will always be outputted. You should always be careful what you put inside the curly brackets. This isn't a place to run code behind the scenes. That should be done in your JavaScript files. I'm going to revert this to the expression we had originally. Expressions can't be used outside of the template. The template would be the element we selected in the mount function. If we were to attempt to create an expression outside of the template, it would be ignored. For example, I'll copy the expression and paste it above the div tag. Going back to the browser, the expression will appear unprocessed. Expressions are only possible within Vue's template. The expression we tried creating outside the template was left alone. I'll go back to the document to remove the expression. One last thing. It's crucial we declare the data inside the data function. Vue will not search for data outside of the configuration object. For example, let's say we create a variable called lastName. Its value will be doe. Then, switching to the document, we're going to create an expression after the first name. This expression will output the lastName variable. Let's refresh the page to see the final result. We'll see the first name appear. The last name does not get outputted. If we were to look at the console, you'll see we get this error. It's telling us that we're using lastName in the template, but it's nowhere to be found in the data. This variable exists in our code, but Vue does not recognize it because it wasn't defined in the object returned by the data function. This is important to understand. You have to set your data from within the Vue instance. Any outside code will be ignored. Let's switch back to our editor. We'll remove the lastName variable. Instead, we're going to define it inside the data object like so. Let's refresh the page one more time. The name is fully appearing in the document. The errors have disappeared in the console. That's fantastic. Vue makes it incredibly easy to render data in our application onto the document. There will be times where we'll have data that we won't want to render on the template. In these cases, we can use the Vue Developer Tools to check the data. Open the Vue Developer Tools panel. Clicking on the root component will show us the data in the instance. Along with viewing the data, we're allowed to make changes. Looking at the data, we'll find the first and last name properties. This is a great way to check if your Vue instance contains the data for your application. That wraps it up for this lecture. We'll continue in the next one.